Right, so we're going to watch a video about how Islam around the world is collapsing. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Follow me at Rafi the Realtor on Instagram for all of your South Florida real estate needs. And you can support the channel by going to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. Let's get into it.
In July 2026, Iran flooded the streets of Tehran to bury the man who built the Islamic Republic on the ruins of a secular state. Ali Khamenei, supreme leader for 36 years, had been killed on the first day of a war back in February 2026. For the better part of a week, his coffin moved through 5 cities where millions turned out to mourn. Flags, portraits, tears, chanting crowds stretching to the horizon. It was the largest show of loyalty that the regime could still summon. But point the camera away from the funeral, and there's another Iran, the one that the state never stages. In the cafes of Tehran, in the side streets, on the phones, filming quietly from doorways, young women walk with their heads uncovered, past the surveillance cameras, past the fines, past the law that their own government swears is still in force. They grew up inside this system. They were supposed to be its future. The government insists that nearly every Iranian is a believer. When independent researchers asked the same population anonymously, barely 40% said the same thing. That gap is the whole story. Because the deepest threat that this regime ever faced, well, it never wore a foreign uniform and it never crossed a border. It came from the generation raised to inherit it. And that generation is actively tearing the religion down from the inside. This is not a quiet drift. This is mutiny. And to understand how a system that controls the schools, the mosques, the airwaves, and the police managed to lose its own children, we have to start with a single number that the regime has spent more than 40 years insisting on: 99%. For decades, that was the figure. Official Iranian statistics have long held that almost the entire population adheres to Islam. It's a foundation stone of the whole project. The Islamic Republic's claim to rule in the name of a faithful people, a nation of believers governed by their beliefs. The trouble is that the number was never once tested against anything that those people could answer honestly. Think about what it takes to say otherwise, in a country where abandoning Islam can carry the harshest penalties on the books, and where any official form arrives stamped with the authority of the state. Telling a government surveyor that you no longer believe, that's not a data point. It's a but rather a confession that can follow you. So the 99% held for decades, not because it was true, but because almost no one could safely afford to contradict it.
That's such an interesting point. It's like, oh, well, the Iranian government says 99% of Iranians adhere to Islam. Yeah, but they're not going to admit it to you because they don't want to go to jail or die. So you can't even challenge that statistic. It's so interesting. It's such a, I actually never thought of that. Meaning, I know you can't challenge it, but you can't really know for a certainty if the stats are wrong, even though we know there definitely isn't 99%. It's far below that. I would say the majority of Iranians, if they're honest, probably don't adhere to Islam. And you see that by how many protesters there were. And there are far more people that weren't in the streets because they were scared to be shot. But we know good and well that figure is far lower than 99%.
Then the questions moved somewhere that the state couldn't follow. Beginning in 2020, an independent research group called Gaman, based in the Netherlands and operating well beyond the reach of Iranian security services, began running anonymous surveys that reached tens of thousands of people inside Iran through VPNs and encrypted channels. In the 2020 survey, only around 40% of respondents identified as Muslim. By the group's 2023 round, the figure had barely moved from there. Nearly half said that they had lost their religion at some point in their own lifetime, raised in believing households, and then walking away as adults. The texture underneath those headline numbers is even more telling. A majority in that 2020 survey said that they did not perform the obligatory daily prayers at all. Large shares reported that they simply didn't observe the fast or that they drank alcohol in a country that bans it outright. Many still said that they believe in some form of God, but far fewer accepted the specific machinery of the state religion, the clergy, the rituals, or the rules. What the survey captured was not one dramatic mass conversion to atheism, but rather a slow, private hollowing out. Millions of people going through the motions in public while believing something else entirely in private. We should be careful, though, and precise about what these numbers are. because the regime would love nothing more than to catch a critic exaggerating. These are online opt-in surveys, not a door-to-door national consensus, and their own authors say so plainly. The samples lean toward the connected and the educated. Even Pew Research, which tracks global religion for a living, noted that the findings have not yet been independently replicated by another organization. But two things can be true at once. The exact figure, it's debatable, but the direction is not. And that direction lines up with everything else that the regime can see with its own eyes. Because if that faithful nation were real, the state would not be fighting this hard to enforce it. For most of the Islamic Republic's history, it held something close to a monopoly on information. It wrote the textbooks. It ran the television stations. It trained the clerics and licensed the sermons that were preached on Fridays. To question the official version of reality, a young Iranian in 1995 would also have to question their teacher, their neighborhood, their family, and their government all at once. And to do it essentially alone, with no way of knowing whether anyone else really felt the same. But that monopoly is gone, and it didn't fall to an invading army. It fell to a device that fits in a pocket. Smartphone ownership among younger Iranians is among the highest in the entire region. And with it came a kind of access that the state never authorized and cannot fully claw back. Foreign media, comparative history, scientific and philosophical material that no censor approved. And above all, the voices of people who had left the faith or left the country and lived to describe it. The mechanisms here matter more than any single argument, so hold on to it, because it's the engine underneath this entire video. The regime did not lose a debate about theology. It lost control of the room where debate happens at all. And once that room opened, something happened inside of it that the state had spent decades preventing. People who thought that they were alone discovered that they were not. On YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, a whole ecosystem of ex-Muslim creators has grown up over the last several years. Many of them young, many of them women who were raised in strict households and chose to speak anyway. They post the stories that the mosque never allowed, why they left, the verse that first made them doubt, the life that they were forbidden from living. Some of these accounts pull millions of views, and the state's usual answer to a heretic, a fatwa, or an arrest does absolutely nothing to an algorithm. A single video recorded in a bedroom in Europe surfaces within hours on a phone in Tehran, in Cairo, in Jakarta. And the crucial effect is not that any one video wins any one argument, but it's that a 19-year-old who was quietly doubted for years suddenly sees 10,000 comments from people who feel exactly the same, and then understands for the first time that the silence around them, it was never an agreement. It was only fear. And the reach does not stop at Iran's borders, which is exactly what makes it impossible to contain. A teenager in Jakarta watches a woman in London explain why she walked away from the hijab. A young man in Cairo sees the same creators that the censors back home are straining to bury. The recommendation engines do not care about national firewalls or the rulings of any council of clerics. They care about attention, and questioning what you were raised to believe holds attention like almost nothing else. So a single video filmed in one apartment can see the same doubt in a dozen countries by the end of the week. And no ministry on earth has yet found the switch that turns that off. Once that happens, the state's oldest tools stop working the way that they always had. You can arrest a person, and Iran, they arrest many. You can throttle the internet during a crisis. And Iran, they've done exactly that, cutting bandwidth to a crawl when the streets fill. What you cannot do is confiscate a suspicion once it already has spread to millions of private screens at that same moment. A cleric can answer one heretic in a mosque, but no cleric can answer a country of them, each holding the entire internet in one hand.
So this is a very interesting video because it highlights the power of social media. Even if you have a ban on apostasy, whether that's imprisonment or death, you can't stop social media getting to certain hands, no matter what kind of restrictions you put, unless you ban cell phones or unless you ban internet entirely. Even then, people will find other ways. You have Elon Musk's Starlink, is that what it's called? Forgetting what it's called already. You cannot stop the wave of social media and its influence. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to follow me at Rafi the Realtor for all of your real estate needs in Miami and the greater South Florida area. And you can support my work by taking a moment to go to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. Any support is so greatly appreciated. Thank you for tuning in as always. I look forward to you tuning in to the next video. Until next time, peace.